It is easy to imagine that these women have been sitting in the same place for centuries, weaving their baskets as the world passes them by. Similarly, guides consistently draw tourist attention to the work of Philip Simmons, a renowned African-American blacksmith whose intricately wrought iron fences and gates grace some of the most magnificent homes on the peninsula. And there's an example. While the emphasis on these black artists represents a significant step towards desegregating the whites-only narrative of Charleston, it is one that is achieved only by moving away from the city's past. Most tour guides linger on Charleston's colonial and antebellum eras, but when their attention turns to African Americans, they quickly change their focus. Sweetgrass basket makers are depicted as outside of history, while Simmons is a representative of Charleston's present, proof of the city's current egalitarian spirit. The restricted vision of Charleston's past is also evident in how guides treat Reconstruction. On the vast majority of tours, the narrative ends abruptly in 1865. If Reconstruction does come up, myth trumps history. At the conclusion of one walking tour, for example, the guide stopped at the Battery, pictured here, directing our attention to Fort Sumter, which you can see in the middle. He then stated in no uncertain terms, quote, that radical Reconstruction was the most undemocratic period in South Carolina history, end quote. Nothing could be further from the truth. In fact, since blacks outnumbered whites in the state for most of the 19th century, Reconstruction, which enfranchised all black and white males, was to that point the most democratic moment in the state's history. Unable to see South Carolina's blacks in his vision of the past, this guide added fuel to one of the oldest fires in all of Southern mythology, that Reconstruction was a period of unspeakable horrors brought on by an undemocratic usurpation of white power. One gets quite a different interpretation of Charleston's history from the African American heritage tour groups that have emerged in the last 20 years. Explicitly responding to the exclusions of the city's official narrative, Black heritage guides argue that one cannot segregate Charleston's past. Seeing the city through their eyes is a lesson in the importance of perspective. African American heritage tours, for example, spend a good deal of time describing Gullah culture. Crafted largely by Low Country slaves, they explain, Gullah language, beliefs, and practices reflect the creative combination of African and New World elements. For Black heritage guides, then, it is Gullah culture, not antebellum white Southern culture, that is really the area's unique gift to the nation. Heritage tours highlight the achievements of the city's free Black population as well. They drive by the graveyards of the Brown Fellowship Society and the Society for Free Blacks of Dark Complexion, burial societies from the 19th century. Black heritage guides also extend the chronological scope of their tours beyond the antebellum period. Even when Black heritage tours cover the same material as traditional tours, they do so in different ways. Take the Miles Bruton House. Traditional guides tend to emphasize the home's architectural significance, noting that it is an outstanding example of the Charleston double house. Black heritage guides, however, focus on the house's iron fence, topped with defensive metal spikes to protect against slave insurrection. In the same vein, traditional tours of the city take visitors past the imposing Aiken Red House, framing it as a testament to the antebellum elite's wealth and power. In contrast, one African American heritage guide makes sure his tourists see the house literally from a different angle. He stops his bus at the rear of the home, which provides a view of the slave quarters. Finally, most traditional tours stop at the Battery, pointing to Fort Sumter, which sits in the middle of Charleston Harbor. They tell stories of how the city's white elite gathered along the seawall to watch the bombardment of Fort Sumter. From the same spot, Black heritage guides point instead to Sullivan's Island, which is to the left, where hundreds of thousands of slaves first stepped onto North American soil. In some, African American heritage guides go far beyond the traditional tours in revealing Charleston's past for what it really was. Yet Charleston's Black heritage guides also find common ground with traditional historical tours. Both types of tours regularly draw visitors' attention to the impressive ironwork of Philip Simmons. One African American tour even ends his tour at the former home and workshop of Simmons, an unexpected surprise for those on the van. The guide clearly hopes the group will appreciate the skill of this now deceased artisan and his successors who still work there. There's another shot. And if a tourist chooses to buy a small trinket to take home as a souvenir, all the better. Yet wandering around Simmons' shop can make one uneasy, bringing to mind the way in which African Americans were portrayed in the tourism industry in the early 20th century. Before he entered a nursing home in 2008, Simmons himself, seemingly a simple man untouched by time and surrounded by his traditional tools, sat waiting for buses of tourists to commodify his primitivism. Since his death in 2009, the artisans carrying on his work have continued to play this role. Like most traditional tours, Black heritage guides also present the sweetgrass basket weavers as mysterious, superstitious, and almost outside of history. The basket weavers practice their craft as they always have and sit ready, you are warned, to put a curse on anyone who takes their picture. To be sure, a belief in magic has long informed Gullah culture. By framing basket weavers solely in terms of the supernatural, however, Black heritage tours run the risk of reducing African Americans to the caricature long prevalent on traditional tours. That Black heritage tours depict local African Americans in this way highlights the power of the white historical narrative. Even Black heritage guides can find its tropes and distortions difficult to escape. On the whole, however, African American heritage guides manage to present Charleston's history in a more inclusive and accurate fashion than most traditional tours, an achievement that certainly overshadows the occasional misstep. And to be fair, they are not alone in this regard. A handful of traditional walking tour guides also do a superb job of integrating the black and white narratives of Charleston's history. And a new edition of the city's tour guide manual, which will include sections on plantation life and significant African American organizations, is near completion. Meanwhile, a number of the house museums and plantations in and around the city have begun to address the experiences of the enslaved and freed people who live at their sites. Yet openings for the ongoing segregation of Charleston's past remain. Tours of the Big House, which continue to dwell on the home's architecture, antiques, and white owners, remain the primary attraction at most house museums and plantations. It is still far too easy, in other words, to visit these sites and learn nothing about the enslaved who toiled there. This observation underscores an important reality. In the end, tourists' interests, as much as any other factor, dictate the narratives provided by tour guides and historical sites in Charleston. And many tourists prefer not to explore the darker sides of our past because these elements seem antithetical to the very reason they are traveling in the first place, as we've already heard. So, where does that leave us? How can Charleston's past be desegregated? There are no easy answers. The tourism analog to school busing, compelling reluctant white tourists to visit the old slave mart museum, for example, is as unappealing as it is unworkable. So perhaps the most we can hope for is that the city's public memory be freed from the strangling grip of myth. While carriage tours passing by Charleston's stately mansions are not likely to linger on the black laborers who work there, we should still insist that they do not reify lost cause ideas about the benign nature of antebellum slavery or the horrors of Reconstruction. At the very least, we should demand that tours that claim to be historical reflect a clear-eyed vision of Charleston's past, even when that exposes the moonlight and magnolia's memory for the myth that it is. Thank you.